Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Only Podcast, Thanksgiving special. Here joined by theonlycolors.com managing editor Joe Toohey after what was an eventful week for MSU athletics, to say the least. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for some food tomorrow and a huge MSU basketball and football weekend in general.
This football game takes on a meaning I'm sure a number of us didn't expect, considering I think almost all of us picked Ohio State to win, especially without Connor Cook playing. So, I mean, we'll start off with that, hit the Ohio State game. We'll preview Penn State, talk about that game, playoffs, championships, all that jazz. Finish up with some basketball. So, yeah, Michigan State goes into Ohio Stadium and wins its second straight in the horseshoe, actually, dating back to 2011, in a similar affair to that 2011 game, which was very low scoring, very defense oriented. And again, without Connor Cook, they pound the ball. They somehow beat Ohio State on the road thanks to a last second field goal. Joe, what'd you take away from the game? Something I'm sure you didn't expect happening, especially when they announced in the beginning that there would be no Cook.
Yeah, that is incredible. I figured after they announced that Cook wasn't going to play that, MSU was going to end up losing by double digits. And, right from the get-go, it was a pretty competitive game. That first 3 and out to me was a little bit surprising, just given how good Ohio State was against this MSU defense, or an MSU defense that was better last year. But as it turns out, this MSU defense held Ohio State to under 3 yards per play, and held them from an efficiency standpoint to 12 yards per drive. They had a crazy number of 3 and outs. It was. The defensive performance is incredible. It was, greatly aided by the conditions, of course. But yeah, that plus the ability of Dave Warner and Jim Bollman to completely revamp the offensive game plan in a week, and the deception by D'Antonio to have Connor Cook sort of presumed to be playing the whole week, and then pulling him right at the end, even having him warm up and stuff like that seemed pretty smart. So incredible.
I guess we won't know how much of a deception or not it was. Maybe we'll know this week, depending on if Cook plays or not. If he doesn't play, then I think maybe, yeah. The biggest thing to me was MSU's offensive line play. To be able to run the ball fairly effectively against a good defensive front and a defensive team that knew you were going to run the ball almost every single play. And MSU was still able to get chunks and move down the field a couple times when it needed to. And yeah, Ohio State, they punted twice in the game last year, the whole game. And to get that defensive performance was surprising. And it says a lot about both sides of the ball. The defensive linebackers played really well. I know John Reschke got a national recognition for what he did deservingly. And it's hard not to talk about trying to figure out what the heck Ohio State was doing. That doesn't take away from what MSU did. D'Antonio did an incredible coaching job, and Urban Meyer did not. I don't know what they were doing. Even in the rain, I could understand a little bit more, but in the second half, I don't believe it rained very much. And to only pass the ball deep twice on this, to only pass the ball twice deep on that defense, on that secondary, was just mind-boggling, because they threw deep once and Demetrius Cox got burned and Braxton Miller was open by 10 yards and they overthrew him, and they never went back to that. They threw one deep ball down the sideline into the wind that kind of got knocked down, and Colhoun had a pass breakup. But other than that, where were the deep passes? So many JT Barrett runs. Just I don't know what they were doing. Tommy Armstrong threw for 320 yards on this team. I don't know what Ohio State was doing. What did you think watching that?
Yeah, it was odd. On the rewatch, so I rewatched the game on Sunday. one thing that stuck out to me that I didn't catch the first time was Heather Cox on the sideline pointed out that this was the first weather game that Ohio State had. You know, they hadn't faced adverse weather conditions yet this season, and I wonder if that played into both the play calling and just the way that the team sort of responded to the
Yeah.
conditions themselves. You know, MSU played in weather conditions both against Purdue and a little bit against Indiana, but yeah, I mean, weather's been sort of miserable in a number of games for MSU this year, and I think that that was a little bit of an advantage. Um, but at the same time, you know, MSU didn't pass the ball a whole lot either, and was significantly more efficient in doing so.
Yeah.
You know, MSU had 4.4 yards per pass, sack adjusted, which is not a good figure. I mean, that's well below the average for the season. The average for the season, I believe, is 7.1 yards per pass, and you know, most of the season has had Connor Cook. But Ohio State averaged 2.2 yards per pass, which is completely absurd. And you know, we really haven't seen that happen this season at all. But even last season and 2 seasons ago, I mean, that's a really crazy number for any team, much less Ohio State at the Horseshoe.
Yeah, and you know, I thought about this as the game went on, and a lot after the game, and that I wonder if Ohio State would have been more aggressive had Connor Cook been in the game. I mean, there were some third and fourth and shorts that they passed up on. Play calling, like I said, very conservative. They were totally fine. And Meyer said afterward they were fine with giving MSU the ball back if it was going to be deep in their own territory. And you know, if Connor Cook's in that game, are they more aggressive coming out of the gates? Are they passing more? Are they being more aggressive because they know MSU is going to come right back? It just felt such a like a safe, tried to play such a safe plan just because MSU didn't have its quarterback. And at some point Ohio State had to realize, you know, our only two scores are off of turnovers here, totaling 38 total yards. Maybe try something different. I don't know, but I did wonder afterward where with the weather and if MSU playing its backup quarterback just kind of got in the heads of Ohio State and just they weren't mentally there. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I think there definitely in the second half was some amount of getting into Ohio State's heads in general. I mean, I think they weren't expecting to have so much difficulty on some of those third and shorts. That one play by Monte Nicholson on JT Barrett on a quarterback keeper in, I believe it was still the first half at that point, was incredible. I mean, that's an angle that we haven't seen Monte Nicholson take this year so far, basically.
Yeah.
So
MSU's
I think
leading tackler, I think, in both games, right? Last two games, I think. He really stepped up.
I'm pretty sure he's top 3 on the team so far this season in total tackles, actually, which is probably not necessarily a good thing. You don't want safeties to be leading tacklers, but I do think that, you know, at some point Ohio State must have been thinking like, all right, you know, we're just going to be able to run the ball at some point against this MSU team, and they never were able to do so. The other interesting thing was that I thought that Ohio State did a horrible job managing the clock at the end of both halves. So at the end of the first half, it seemed like Ohio State could have taken some timeouts to preserve 2 or so minutes, and they didn't, and then they ended up punting anyways. And then MSU just kind of took a knee to take a tie game into the half. But then in the second half, Ohio State didn't start calling timeouts to preserve clock when it was clear that MSU was within field goal range, which is also a confusing strategy because, I mean, you might as well give your offense at least a chance to get the ball back, you know, and they never did. And so they just let the game end on a field goal attempt, which, I mean, even more than the play calling is a totally avoidable situation if you just use your timeouts and you know that MSU is going to run the ball in that situation because they aren't going to put the ball on, you know, in the hands of the backup quarterback at that point, or probably won't at least. So it's Ohio State mismanaged the game, not only in terms of play calling, but just in general. I mean, it's kind of amazing, really.
Right, and that's, I mean, I said last week, I didn't think MSU had a chance because Urban Meyer is a damn good coach who puts his players in the best spot to succeed, and that did not happen at all. And D'Antonio just completely, I don't know, messed with his head, just completely got the upper hand on him in every way. I mean, you can't say any more than MSU won at Ohio State with his backup quarterback. I mean, just it's just an incredible coaching job by D'Antonio, and yeah, and you look at so they win on the last second field goal. They against Ohio State and Michigan, they win both games on a last second special teams play where they didn't lead the whole game, and they played pretty badly on special teams in those games. I mean,
Yeah.
McGarrett Kings with the muff punt, terrible decision. Geiger missed a field goal. Although I will say, in a good special teams note, Kevin Cronin was booming his kickoffs. I know he had the wind at his back for a number of them, but he got a lot of touchbacks that he's not been getting this year.
Well, and special teams is one of the more inexplicable areas for MSU just in general. I mean, yes, there's a new special teams coach, but yeah, somebody like Kevin Cronin, who last year had touchbacks on nearly 2/3 of his kicks, all of a sudden is having real trouble getting the ball to the end zone very often at all. And that's something that I don't understand how a coach could affect somebody like Cronin in those situations. But yeah, I mean, I thought overall, the muff punt was bad and clearly set up one of the 2 touchdowns for Ohio State. But overall, apart from that muffed punt, I thought that the MSU special teams actually played pretty well. There was that bad punt by Johnston for Ohio State that got recovered by Grayson Miller, which may or may not have been actually a live ball, given that it kind of ricocheted off of Zach Weimarach's head.
It looked like they didn't rule it a dead ball because they said it hit the Ohio State guy in the head and before the MSU guy. Because I was confused at the time if it could have been recovered by Ohio State because it hit an MSU player too. But I guess it was behind the line of scrimmage, so that would have been treated like a block.
Right. Yeah, and I mean either way, I mean Grayson Miller picking up the ball and returning it for a yard or whatever.
Because it could have been a live ball. That was a great head up play, definitely. I don't know what the heck happened on that kick. He just kicked it off the side of his foot in there. I mean, I know the rain was there, but it was kind of
right. But that's another one of those situations where I kind of figure that having played in a rain game, in a game where rain was a major factor, like against Purdue, where there was a muffed punt snap. Yeah. Could have been an advantage for MSU in that case. But yeah, I mean, I thought overall special teams weren't bad. Other than that one muffed punt by McGarrett Kings, but that was something that was a positive. Field position on the day was basically even. MSU started about their 32 on average, and Ohio State started at about their 33. So yeah, I mean, that was another thing I was a little bit concerned about because Ohio State has some real athletes that can do some returning, and the return coverage was much better in this game than it had been at the beginning of this year. But not only that, so the other big game this year against Oregon, the final margin for that game was 3 points, which means that a Michael Geiger kick ended up being the winning points in that game. But that game shouldn't have been as close as it was because there was a punt return touchdown in that game as well. So
did he? I think he missed a field goal in that game too.
That's possible. I don't remember, but
I'll double check that.
Either way, it's a classic case of special teams giveth and special teams taketh away. I mean, these games didn't have to be as close as they were, but they ended up
that's the thing. I mean, MSU dominated this game against Ohio State. I mean, this wasn't like the Michigan game. The poor special teams put them in a position where I didn't think they were. I think if they had lost, it would have been fair. This was a game against Ohio State where they were the better team. Ohio State could do nothing, and outside of 2 turnovers, Ohio State didn't do anything. And yeah, Geiger missed a field goal against Oregon. So yeah,
right,
yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, this is a game they dominated. Just they deserved to win the game. They just pushed Ohio State around. I couldn't believe. I mean, they were banged up on the line. I know. Who was it that went out? Was it Brian Allen that went out? Or McGowan? Someone went out during the game. I don't know if they came back in or not, but I know
Clemens. It was Clemens who went out.
It was Clemens. Yeah, Clemens and Jack Allen was hobbling a bit and just for that kind of performance is just remarkable.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about the offensive line is that Clemens was playing at all. I mean, it seemed like they have been rotating offensive linemen through a little bit more. So I've noticed that Benny McGowan has been playing a lot at left guard, with or without Brian Allen in the game. They're kind of rotating those two guys through. I think that they're listed as co-starters for this week, actually. And then Clemens has been playing a lot at right guard with Donovan Clark at right tackle. I don't know if Cody Keeler is still a little bit hobbled or not, or if they're just kind of, going with a rotation on that side of the offensive line as well. It seems like pretty much Jack Allen and Jack Conklin are the only two guys who are always on the field for MSU. And, in this game specifically, Joey Bosa was never lined up across from Jack Conklin, which was a little bit disappointing from a scout's point of view, because they didn't actually get to see those two guys against each other.
Did they do that? I think they did that last year, I think, because Conklin, I think, for a bit was getting the upper hand, and then they kind of moved Bosa to the other side, and they moved him into some other spots. I don't know if it was preemptive or what, but yeah, I was kind of surprised that didn't get more of that.
Yeah, well, and then the other thing that was interesting was I thought that the MSU coaching staff did a nice job of using Paul Lang to double team Bosa on that right side. They kind of lined Paul Lang up, not exactly in line with the offensive line, just kind of back off the line of scrimmage, and it seemed to be pretty effective in dealing with Bosa, although Bosa definitely had an impact on the game anyways, but there's just kind of nothing you can do about that. Yeah, I mean, from a coaching perspective, it was all D'Antonio, and that is unexpected. I mean, obviously D'Antonio is fantastic, but you expect Urban Meyer to do pretty well himself, and this is two different 20-game winning streaks that Ohio State has had that MSU has ended now.
Yeah, we can get that in a second. One thing I will that I did criticize during the game was not consistently going with Gerald Holmes when he seemed to be doing well. They put in LJ Scott in the fourth quarter, and it worked. I mean, he got him out of when they were backed up at the goal line, and LJ Scott did very well in the carries he got late. But there were times in the middle of the game where it was Madre London or Delton Williams were getting carries, and I just didn't understand it, because they always say, we go with the hot hand, but every time Gerald Holmes is the hot hand, he doesn't seem to stay in the game for the next drive. I thought he could have had more than 14 carries.
He's really come on. I've been really impressed with him.
Yeah.
Just in general, it seems like he has a knack for just kind of really working hard and trying to get through, and he does more often than not. I mean, on the very first drive of the game, I think on the very first offensive play MSU had, it was an 8-yard run where it looked like he was stopped for about 2 or 3 yards and just kind of kept pounding and squirted through, and those yards ended up being extremely valuable over the course of the game. And Delton Williams played too, a little bit, and so yeah, it's odd that they talk about riding a hot hand and then they played 4 different running backs in this game. I guess I understand it to some degree because they all kind of bring a little bit of something different, but I agree. I think that Gerald Holmes is kind of going to force the hand a little bit. I think he's been the best back over the last few games. But the good news is that it does look like Madre London is back from injury.
Yeah. And LJ Scott did prove his worth in the fourth quarter with a number of carries, like I said. But up to that point, I wasn't sure if he'd quite have deserved those carries, because Holmes had been doing well and Scott had fumbled twice on 2 carries last week. But worked out. That's why they're the coaches and I'm not. And we talked about D'Antonio or Urban Meyer. He's 31-0 against the rest of the Big Ten and 2-2 against Michigan State. And you kind of wonder if I know the Cleveland Plain Dealer wrote a column wondering if D'Antonio is the Nick Saban to Urban Meyer. Although Urban got the upper hand, Saban got the upper hand later. But the idea that the one coach just knows how to attack the other coach, and this was without Pat Narduzzi. And the column made me wonder if at any time in the last 4 years, if D'Antonio and Saban got together at all and talked about Urban Meyer. I know that the staffs got together in 2012, the staffs get together for a variety of reasons, just share stuff, not for any particular reason. But one of the things they talked about in 2012 was MSU shared how they stopped Denard Robinson because Alabama opened that year with Michigan. So I guess that would have been the first year of Meyer at Ohio State. So it's possible
that was 2012. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was possible. It's possible they could have talked about that too. Because Saban obviously has had his share of battles with him. And
that would also be something that you wouldn't want to necessarily tell the MSU fan base about, considering the hate that MSU fans have for Nick Saban.
Yeah. And I mean, it's weird because D'Antonio's 2 wins are on the road and at a neutral site, and he lost both games at home. So that's something just interesting. But yeah, I mean, just a tremendous.
One last thing about the game that bothered me a little bit is and this was one thing that, I mean, it's just always going to bother me and probably a lot of other statistically minded people, but there are a couple different times in the third quarter, and I was actually just looking through the play-by-play to find the exact times. A couple times in the third quarter where D'Antonio decided to punt in situations where I would have gone for it. Obviously it worked out, but it seemed to me like, as an underdog, you kind of wanted to force your hand a little bit in the second half, especially. So in the third quarter, there was at one point, there was 4th and 2. MSU had 4th and 2 from their own 45 and decided to punt. At the time, I think I kind of might have gone for it there.
See, I can understand it from MSU's perspective because I know you're the underdog, but it's hard. You don't, I guess, maybe I'm thinking of it backwards, but I was surprised Ohio State didn't go for it more because they had the weapons. I could understand if MSU didn't feel they had the weapons, and so they'd rather play conservative and try to slow the game down. And I mean, that was part of it. Make Ohio State drive a longer field, slow, it's not slow the game down, speed the game. Well, I guess slow it down. I guess it's slow it down, but then it's going shorter. But run few. I mean, keep the clock going because they got to go a longer field. I mean, they only finished with 45 plays. Ohio State did, and
right.
So I can understand. I can understand it more from MSU's perspective than Ohio State's perspective because I think you've got the weapons, and if you don't get it, you figure they're not moving the ball anyway. You can afford to take more chances. Although I can understand on the other hand, MSU's the underdog. How many chances are you going to have at this point of the field? So I mean, I can see both sides.
I feel like you've become the Sicilian from Princess Bride just now. But okay, so the second situation, and this one I think was the one that really got me mad and was a little bit more egregious, was because in that situation, that was at MSU's 45. So in that situation, I sort of understand the punt because if you turn it over on your side of the field, there's a good chance that Ohio State at least gets a field goal out of that possession. So that makes sense to me. In this situation, though, the drive after that, so there's that 4th and 2 from the MSU 45. They punt. They force an Ohio State 3 and out. They get the ball back. MSU drives to the Ohio State 41. It's at the Ohio State 41, 4th and 3, and they decided to punt. That was the one that really got me. They ended up being a 26-yard punt to the 15. And to me, that was a situation where going for it made a ton of sense. I mean, 4th and 3 is no gimme, but you're averaging 4 yards a carry.
Yeah.
Well, in general,
it's 4th and 3, but you're not passing it well. I mean, maybe you do a rollout, try to get them, but 3, I don't know. 3 is a lot. For 3 is a lot. I mean, I know I understand MSU was basically running on every play, and Ohio State knew it and couldn't stop it, but 3 just seems like a lot. Considering I don't think they would have passed it or wouldn't have had much confidence in passing it.
Yeah, I just still think if you're the underdog, at the time the game was tied 7-7, but at the time when you're the underdog, like you need to try to assert an advantage at that point.
Here's my take. Here's my actual thing.
You figured it out.
Yes, I understand it being the underdog, but on the other hand, MSU being the underdog, its strategy was to quicken, slow down, whatever the word is, make the game end quicker, and shortening the game. Shortening would be shorten the game. And I think punting in those situations provided that, especially since Ohio State never ended up hitting the big play or never showed much of a desire to hit it. So I understand the underdog. I just think MSU's overall goal, and it was very clear from the very first series that we're gonna get out of here as quick as we can and not let you not. I still can't figure out what the way to phrase it. I don't know. Is it speed up or is it slowed down? I mean, speed. It's not. It's slower tempo, and it shortens the game. So slow the game down, I guess. It's not. The thing is, it's not basketball, so it's kind of weird. So
right, but so this is something that I've been writing about all year, and it's been a weird issue for MSU. And in this game, it played to MSU's advantage, but MSU has been playing a very slow pace all season.
Yeah,
and part of that is that. And this game was actually not one of the slowest games of the year. The slowest game of the year is actually the Central game, where there was a total of 16 possessions combined for both teams, which is insane. But so in this game, MSU had 10 true possessions, and Ohio State actually had 11. Ohio State had an additional possession in this game. But yeah, tempo is a very important part of college football that I don't think is very well understood, because there's a lot happening with tempo, and essentially time of possession is the only decent metric, or the only thing that I think a national media can recognize that has some bearing on tempo. But what has ended up happening is MSU has played slower games. When you play slower games, games tend to be closer. And even against Nebraska, the pace slowed down, and that game ended up being closer than it needed to be, and ended up, being an MSU loss, partially because the tempo was as slow as it was. When you play a slow pace like they did in 2012, and this is something that you wrote about on theonlycolors.com quite a bit, is the slow pace of the offense in 2012. I remember that specifically.
And then that's what I said, because I said then to speed it up. I think I said speed it up back then because that's the only time Maxwell, it seemed like, could ever get going, is when they were moving quicker. So I guess that's the opposite of what I'm arguing now.
Well, I think what was odd in 2012 was that regardless of the pace of play for the offense was so bad and the defense was so good that the games were going to be low scoring regardless of tempo. And probably the slow pace ended up benefiting the defense tempo-wise in some games, but it made the outcomes unpredictable, because that makes individual plays matter a whole lot more in those low-scoring games. Now, that wasn't an issue last year at all. I mean, last year I believe there was only one game that was decided by. There were two games decided by single digits last year, right? There was the win over Nebraska, which is a 5-point game, and then there was the win over Baylor, which was also a 1-point game. You know what I'm saying there. But that was partially because the pace was a lot faster, and that was partially because the offense was better, but also the defense was giving up big plays. So there's all these factors that kind of play into tempo, and none of them are particularly well understood. And we don't really have great analytics to describe tempo and what a team is trying to do. I mean, intent is important when it comes down to that. But in any case, tempo did benefit MSU in this game. The slow tempo did benefit MSU because MSU's probably at a disadvantage, probably the underdog. So over a course of 100 possessions, Ohio State is probably better.
Right. It was
when you only have 10 each.
And they were, and there was, okay, we want to run as few plays as possible in this game, because you lower that and the odds of expanding a lead are difficult. And so I mean, I thought MSU had a great game plan, and Ohio State's strange play calling played right into it. And to see the way I noticed after the game, I noted when the Ohio State players were, Ezekiel was blasting the coaches, and him and Cardale Jones are saying they're going pro, and it's just it felt like a team that didn't know how to lose. And I compared it to a couple weeks. I said, compare how the Ohio State's reacting to this loss to how MSU reacted to the Nebraska loss when they lost on that bad non-call by the officials. You didn't have everybody destroying the refs, and they took the blame. And it started from the head coach. It started from D'Antonio, who in the press conference said, "It's not my job, but we could have won the game plenty prior." He didn't sit there and moan about officiating, and that trickles down to your players and it's the cultures there, and to stay mentally tough, to be able to overcome adversity and stay mentally tough in difficult situations. And that's exactly what MSU did. They did it. They kind of got lucky, but they did it against Michigan. They did it against Ohio State. They made the play when they needed to beat Purdue. They made the plays when they needed to beat Rutgers. They've made the plays when they needed to beat all these teams except for Nebraska. And you can argue it was not aided by officiating. I just thought it was interesting how both teams reacted to their respective losses. I think said a lot about the culture in those programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to say that this MSU team didn't get down about itself after the loss to Nebraska, right? And emotional maturity is something that pre-D'Antonio, this MSU team famously lacked.
Right.
And so,
right. I was on the Black Shoe podcast. Right. I was on the Black Shoe Diaries podcast recorded yesterday, and I said you compare how D'Antonio reacts to things to compare to John L. Smith slapping himself and say the coach is screwing it up. Yeah, it's a complete 180.
Yeah, which is great. It's one of those things where that seems to me to be the biggest element of why this MSU team was as competitive as it was in this game, because they didn't feel sorry for themselves after that Nebraska loss, like I did, and I think a lot of fans did. And yeah, they just came out and played well. I didn't see that in them, and I think that they knew that they had that gear. And I hope that we, continue to see that here in the next few games.
Yeah, and so they're in position now to all the goals accomplished are ahead of them. But in order for that to happen, we'll talk about the scenarios next. But first, they have to beat Penn State at home for the legendary land-grant trophy. This trophy, this rivalry, the pageantry, this is what college football is all about. Nothing can match the fever of the land-grant rivalry.
Yeah, they've played a total of 29 games in some, so that's how you know that a rivalry is really intense. When they play nearly 30 games.
That makes each one even more valuable. They're not watered down by a century of results. And you hear it up there. Red Sox, Yankees, Celtics, Lakers. And in Michigan State, Penn State, it's just how it always is, and it's how it always will be.
And it's a tie series right now, 14-1. Both teams have won 14 games. So
yeah, and this will be 3:30 game. So the winner of Michigan Ohio State will get at least a share of the Big Ten East title. If MSU wins, they will share, but MSU will have the tiebreaker to go on. So this game, Penn State comes in 7-4, I think, coming off a loss to Michigan. It's kind of the same Penn State team it's been for a few years. Quarterback Christian Hackenberg's got talent, but he's very inconsistent. He seems mentally broken. The defense is very good. The defensive line is very good, but their offensive line's a mess, and they can't protect the quarterback. So, what jumps out at you first coming into this game?
So the thing that scares me is Penn State's defensive line, which is very good. And if Connor Cook can't go, and there's no more element of surprise with him not playing, I could see this MSU offense struggling to some degree, just because, even against Ohio State, they averaged 4.5 yards a carry, which is good against a very good Ohio State defense, but not necessarily something you can totally hang your hat on unless, unless you can throw the ball a little bit. So yeah, that's a concern of mine heading into this game is that I think the Penn State defense is pretty good. And there could be some weather, it's supposed to rain here for the next couple of days in Michigan. I don't know if that'll extend into Saturday. I know that they closed Munn Field to tailgating, which is interesting, but
yeah, they usually do that. Yeah,
that's the thing that scares me is Penn State's defense, and what could happen against this MSU team without Connor Cook.
Right, and Carl Nassib, their All-American defensive lineman. I believe he played the first series against Michigan and did not play the rest of the game. James Franklin is not talking about his health, so he appears to be banged up. He appears to be in a similar situation as Connor Cook, and if he can't go, that's huge because their line was a bit inconsistent, I think, against Michigan.
Holy shit, he has 15 and a half sacks. Carl Nassib does.
Yeah, he's really good. That's a lot. Yeah. And so they're coming off a game against Michigan where they were in position to make some plays, but they kicked 3 field goals and 3 red zone trips. Some brutal play calling in the red zone. We'll probably see some wildcat from them for some reason in some situations. So, there was doing the Penn State podcast the other day. They were very not happy with their play calling. Sounded a lot like Ezekiel Elliott. So I think it'll be interesting. I think this game comes down to if MSU can get the pressure on Christian Hackenberg, because if he gets pressure on him, he starts feeling pressure the rest of the game, even if it's not there. And he'll start hearing footsteps. And when he starts hearing footsteps, his ball starts fluttering. He starts getting inaccurate. So MSU is going to have to first off stop. They're going to have to win up front defensively. But we say it every week that the way to attack this MSU D is to throw a lot of deep balls. And if Hackenberg has the arm to do it, it'll just depend on if he has the time to do it, which will be interesting. And yeah, if Connor Cook can't go, I think it could be a difficult day for the MSU offense against another pretty stout defensive line that will be prepared for what MSU will have to offer them.
Yeah, and so in the last 2 games, the MSU passing offense has dropped off a cliff. So the season average for sack-adjusted yards per pass has been 7.1 yards per pass, and actually MSU is only below that figure against Oregon and against Indiana. Every other game they've been, around 7.5 or up into the 8s in terms of yards per pass. Against Maryland, they averaged less than 3.5 yards per pass, and against Ohio State, it was 4.4. And those are the 2 games where Connor Cook wasn't able to go for the whole game. So that's a major concern for me. If they can run the ball relatively effectively, that'll be very helpful. But without some semblance of a passing game, this is going to be a real slog. And I think the over-under for this game is 47 points.
When we recorded the thing yesterday, there hadn't been anything out because Vegas didn't, or a lot of places didn't have anything out because of Cooks up in the air, whether it be a point spread or an over-under. And that makes a big difference. So that's why.
Yeah. So the line I saw today that got released was MSU by 11, and the over/under was 47. So I think I would take the under in that situation because I think that both defenses are going to be a little bit better than that over/under suggests.
Right. And this MSU team has been better on the road than they have been at home, especially offensively. For whatever reason, they never seem to really get going on offense at home very much.
Well, and part of that is just the offensive style that they played with Connor Cook, and then obviously without Connor Cook, that's a whole different ballgame. But with Cook, it seemed like the strategy, at least in the passing game, was to throw these back shoulder fades into small windows, which Aaron Burbridge and McGarry Kings and RJ Shelton can catch to some degree, but it's a low margin play. And so, when that's your passing offense, it is sometimes difficult to have success on every drive, right? Especially when you're not running the ball well and putting yourself into 3rd and long situations. Cook's completion percentage hasn't ever been particularly impressive. I mean, he does a good job in terms of touchdowns and interceptions and average per attempt, but his passing stats, let me look this up right now. Yeah, I mean, Cook's completion rate for the season is only 56%, which is not particularly impressive. You want to be above 60%, especially as a sort of a top tier college quarterback. But yeah, that's to me the reason why the offense has kind of stopped and started a lot is because of the low margin for error with the passing game, and that's definitely going to be an issue in this game if Cook plays or doesn't, right? So
yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, so kind of up in the air with that. What's your score prediction?
So my score prediction was a slog like 20-13, and I think it could be lower scoring than that actually. And I'm guessing that Cook is 50-50 to play or not. I guess I don't know necessarily. I don't think, even if he does play, I don't think he'll play the whole game. I think that they'll give more snaps to Terry and or O'Connor than they would normally, just to, especially if the game gets out to a 2-score lead or something like that. I think that those guys will see a little bit more playing time than they would otherwise.
Yeah, I had actually said 20-10, but then I know somebody on the TOC staff did that, so I'm going 21-10. So I mean, this game, as we kind of transition into what it means and what's next, a lot of scenarios can play out, but quite simply, if MSU wins its next 2 games, I think it's in, no matter what. If you beat Penn State and beat a top 5 Iowa team, without a doubt. Now, if Iowa loses to Nebraska, it could complicate things a bit, but I think it would be in MSU's benefit because they play a week after Notre Dame, Stanford. So Notre Dame would be off and MSU would get an extra data point, which I think will, just having that, I think being able to make the final impression if it were to come down to MSU and Notre Dame are there. But obviously you'd have to win the Big Ten championship, and Iowa's looked really good this year. So that's by no means a easy win or anything, but we're just discussing scenarios here because now that the playoff rankings come out, MSU's number 5, behind Iowa at 4, Oklahoma at 3. When you saw the rankings come out, I mean, do you have any reaction? I know it kind of doesn't really matter to MSU to win you're in, lose you're not. I mean, what'd you think of the ranking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the biggest takeaway is with Iowa at 4 and MSU at 5, I think it's pretty clear that the winner of, if it's the winner of the Big Ten, if it's Iowa or if it's MSU, if those 2 teams don't drop a game sort of in between, is pretty clearly in the field. Yeah, I mean, the complicating potential issue is a Nebraska win against Iowa, which isn't particularly unlikely. I mean, I think it's
Nebraska's won their last. I mean, Nebraska's won their last 2 or 3, and if they win to, that's the thing is, if they win to get to 6-6, they will have beaten 2 top 10 teams in over something like a 4-week span or something like that. But if they
Right.
win, that gives MSU an 8th 500 or better team on the schedule because they'd be 6-6. And then if Indiana beats Purdue, which you got to think is likely, they'd make it 9. So, well, obviously you want Iowa to win. MSU would want Iowa to win. If you're going to make it, and beating a better Iowa would be the better way to go. It's not all bad if Iowa were to lose, but if you're an MSU fan, you're rooting for Iowa to lose on Friday. They play Friday, right? They usually play Friday.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, you're rooting for Iowa to win on Friday. Michigan Ohio State game, I don't know if it doesn't really matter, and then obviously you'd be rooting for MSU to win its own game. Now, here's
the one.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I was going to change the topic. You go.
Okay, so I think the one potential complicated scenario is an Iowa loss to Nebraska, and then a very, very close Big Ten championship game where MSU needs a last-second field goal to win or something like that. If that was to happen, I could see, and let's say Notre Dame beats Stanford, right? Which is in Palo Alto. So in that case, I could see that being not necessarily an overwhelmingly positive data point for MSU at that point. I think I agree, though. I think it would be really hard for the committee to hold a 1-loss Big Ten champion out of the playoff after the Big Ten won the national championship last year. I think that actually really helps the Big Ten to some degree because, if you have a 1-loss Big Ten champion, competing against other one-loss teams that may or may not be their conference's champion. I think the fact that it's the Big Ten and the fact that the Big Ten won the national title last year plays into MSU's favor.
Yeah, so I mean, if MSU wins, they're in. If they lose Saturday, they're not even in the Big Ten championship. Now, where it gets a little complicated, and we can probably touch on it more next week. I'm wondering if there's any if there is a scenario for MSU to make the Rose Bowl with a loss to Iowa if they were to get to that point, because you assume if Iowa wins the next two and wins, they're in the playoff. MSU would lose. Could they be jumped by the winner of Michigan Ohio State for the Rose Bowl berth? Because Ohio State's 8, Michigan's 10, so the winner is going to get a little bit of a boost there. Although MSU did beat the other one.
So I think the scenario there
and Ohio State and Michigan would definitely bring more fans and
I think
money
that's part of the issue.
And money and prestige if you're the Rose Bowl. So I'm struggling to know if MSU. It could be like 2011 where they lost to Wisconsin, got knocked out so far that they were ineligible for BCS Bowl, and then Michigan slid in there to the Sugar Bowl.
So I think that the scenario is if Michigan beats Ohio State, MSU loses to Penn State, and so then Michigan plays Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, and Iowa beats Michigan, then you've got a 3-loss Michigan team, a 2-loss Ohio State team, and that 2-loss Ohio State team will have lost their final 2 games of the season. And then I think, then it becomes a really interesting question for the Rose Bowl at that point. But my guess is at that point it would probably be MSU, because it seems like it would be hard to take a 2-loss Ohio State that had just lost at home to MSU over MSU. But then again, Ohio State's 2 losses would be only to MSU and to Michigan. There's some really weird scenarios in there, but I'd rather not worry about them, because I really just hope that they beat Penn State and things get simple.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Like I said, if MSU wins, are in. If not, we'll touch more on this, I think, next week when there's more clear scenarios. Now there's a whole ton of things that are going to happen, but first off for MSU is they obviously need to keep the prestigious land-grant trophy.
Yes.
And, parade
the best
around.
Trophy in all of sports?
Are
we willing to go that far?
I mean, why leave it to sports? I mean, just everything.
The best trophy anywhere for anything.
Yeah.
All right, I'm in.
You can't even imagine in your mind anything more prestigious. So yeah, football is that. So basketball, we'll wrap up here with some hoops. Last time we had talked, MSU had beaten Kansas. Since then, they have defeated Arkansas Pine Bluff and Eastern Michigan in 2 games that were not close at all. And I honestly was watching in and out of them because they were very boring. Joe, you have season tickets, right? Did you go to the games?
So I went to Arkansas Pine Bluff, but I sold my tickets for the Eastern game. But I still watched it on TV.
Takeaways from the last 2 games.
Well, the other big news is that MSU got all the way up to number 3 in the AP poll.
Yes.
Which was released yesterday, 2 days ago. I think 2 days ago. I mean, I think the biggest thing was, so Arkansas Pine Bluff is one of the absolute worst Division I teams. They're in the SWAC, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, which is really bad. Pretty clearly the worst D1 basketball conference. So there's really no takeaways from that game.
That's where Texas Southern was too.
Yeah, which is bad. I mean, Texas Southern did win that conference last year and beat MSU in the Breslin Center. But anyways, there was really not a whole lot to take away from that game other than, it wasn't, they doubled them up. That's sort of what you expect to have happen there. And then the Eastern game was a little bit more interesting because Eastern's made some sort of postseason tournament for the last couple of years at least, and plays a 2-3 zone, a pretty aggressive 2-3 zone. Their coach was an assistant under Boeheim at Syracuse, so they run an interesting system which could have theoretically given MSU some fits, given how much MSU turns the ball over, especially early in the season. But MSU actually did a very good job taking care of the ball in that game, which was good to see. And then the other thing was Javon Bess taking over the game at one point and getting to the line pretty consistently, which I think is going to be a pretty major help this season if he can do that consistently, because it's one thing that the offense was missing last year was a guy who could get to the rim and get fouled with consistency. I mean, in the first half, for MSU, Valentine and Costello were a combined 1 for 10 from the field, and MSU is still scoring, 1.4 points per possession, which is impressive, just because, the concern still to some degree was who the secondary playmaker was going to be. And with those guys shooting so poorly, it's good to see that other guys were able to pick up the slack to some degree, even against, a relatively overmatched Eastern team.
Yeah, Javon Bess definitely sliding in. If he plays like he's played, he's shown a lot of his potential in the last couple of games from what I have watched and from what I checked out in box score and stuff. And he's a Raymar Morgan type. I think that would be a great matchup for MSU.
And Deonta Davis had a great game too. He, put up 16 points and had another 5-block game. He had 5 blocks in the opener against Florida Atlantic as well. So he also had a tech for jawing at an Eastern guy, which seemed kind of weak, but I guess he had been warned. But I kind of like that. I kind of like that there's a little bit of an edge to a freshman like that. But no, I mean, the other thing to take away is that, like, there's some other Big Ten teams that have struggled with some bad teams, like Maryland struggling with Ryder, Wisconsin losing to Western Illinois.
Big Ten. Yeah, Indiana lost also to UNLV today.
Right, and at least UNLV is like sort of a traditional basketball school.
Michigan lost at home to Xavier. So Wisconsin is just Big Ten. Purdue's looking good. So I mean, it's early, but the Big Ten is not picking up a lot of either bad losses or narrow wins against some bad teams early on. And for MSU to take care of its business is obviously a good thing for them.
Yeah, and very convincingly at that. Not leaving really any room for doubt in any of these games, which is something that they didn't do last year, right? I mean, the opener against Navy last year was a lot closer. I mean, that was a single-digit final margin, and like we mentioned, the loss to Texas Southern. So yeah, it's been great to see this MSU team play as well as it has in the non-conference. And then this week coming up is pretty interesting. They play in the Wooden Legacy Tournament, which is in the first couple games will be in Fullerton, California. They're playing at UC Fullerton, and then the final game is in actually I'm not sure, in Anaheim. I think that they're playing. I forget exactly where they're playing in Anaheim, but Arizona is in this tournament, and it's I did some analysis that's up on TOC on theonlycolors.com about who MSU will end up playing in this tournament, because it's kind of a wild format. It's 8 teams, and every team plays 3 games. So if you lose twice, you get a third game still. So there's a lot of potential scenarios for MSU to play a bunch of different teams. But yeah, there's a little bit better than a 50% chance that MSU plays Arizona, who is the Pac-12 favorite at this point. They're top 10 in KenPom. And so yeah, it should be a pretty good weekend for hoops as well. They play Thursday against Boston College at 6:30, which I will be convincing my aunt and uncle to put on the TV after Thanksgiving dinner. And then they play again on Friday afternoon against the winner of, or loser of, theoretically, Boise State and UC Irvine. And then they play on Sunday against Arizona or Evansville or Providence or Santa Clara, but it probably is going to be Arizona.
And then they host a week from Wednesday, when we're recording this, they host Louisville at Breslin. So a lot of hoops in the next week. I guess we'll probably have to record this podcast on Tuesday if they're playing Wednesday night. Oh, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure what day we'll record the next one.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be a tricky one. Yeah, because then maybe we can do live after the college football playoff rankings are announced. But it'll be an interesting week of basketball. I think we'll see this MSU team and get a slightly better feel. I mean, they've really only played one real game against Kansas, and even Boston College or Boise State is going to give us a slightly better idea about who this MSU team is, and especially if they end up playing Arizona, that could be a pretty impressive non-conference slate between Kansas, Arizona, Louisville, and then on the 12th they play Florida at the Breslin Center as well. So
yeah.
It's,
so we're ratcheting up. We're ratcheting up into hoops. I'm still in football mode, and it always takes a while for me to get over that. But so a lot of stuff going on in the next month.
Yeah, and we'll be covering it all at theonlycolors.com.
Yeah,
so make sure
check that out. A lot of good stuff. A lot of people writing a lot of good stuff. So make sure you check that out and follow it on Twitter. Follow me at The Only Colors. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Fanini, and Joe is at JOBIN. Number 2, letter E. And you got anything else you want to hit?
Well, okay, so one really quick thing. We got a question from Zach Brooks, who's a loyal podcast listener.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted us to give him our final 4 rankings of best Thanksgiving food. Who's your top 4, Chris?
You know what? I'm not much of a eater, I guess. In general, I only weigh about 135 pounds. I don't like turkey. I just kind of eat scrubs of kind of junk and everything around, and I don't have turkey. So I'm not in any position to rank anything, and it would probably be an insult to the people who do if I did. So that's my answer, and I'll let you wrap it up.
Wow, that was really, really unexpected. Okay, so my top 4, I think at number 1, the clear favorite here is mashed potatoes. Everybody loves mashed potatoes. Really hard to go wrong. Even people who think that, because people say that turkey's dry, their resume isn't that good, so they're not number 1. I think at number 2, 2 is probably turkey because they've got a loss in their schedule, but they still are definitely in the top 4. Number 3, I'm going to go with sweet potatoes.
Is turkey in number 2 based on its brand name, like Alabama?
Yes, exactly. Number 3, I'm going to go with sweet potatoes because they're my personal favorite. And then at number 4, I'm going to go stuffing because it's another classic that would be hard to leave out of the field. Well,
I can't make any arguments, that's for sure. So.
I'm going to leave out anything with cranberry. That's always weird stuff. I'm just not a fan of that. Like green bean casserole, I've never totally understood as a thing. I don't mind green beans, but in casserole form, it's kind of strange. I think underrated, the one that doesn't get enough love is any sort of squash dish. I'm a big squash fan, but I tend to be like the only person, so I wasn't going to put them in my top 4 because gotta respect the turkey. But
well, there you go. I can't make any arguments. So thanks, guys, for listening. We'll do this again next week at some point. Not sure what day, but a lot will happen between now and then. So till then, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week. See you.
See ya.